Wall Street, 1968. If you look at the history books, they call this the go-go era. It was the golden age of American finance. The Dow Jones was roaring, institutional money was pouring in like a tidal wave, and everyone, from the shoe-shine boy to the bank president, wanted a piece of the action. It was a time of aggressive mergers, wild speculation, and the kind of optimism that only exists right before a catastrophe. On the surface, the American financial engine seemed unstoppable, a gleaming machine of capitalism crushing everything in its path. But if you could have walked into the back offices of the New York Stock Exchange in the summer of 1968, you wouldn't have seen a gleaming machine. You would have seen a disaster zone. The engine wasn't roaring, it was melting down. The offices were literally buried in paper. Stock certificates were piled on desks, stacked in corridors, and stuffed into filing cabinets until the drawers wouldn't close. There were rumors of certificates being found in elevator shafts, behind radiators, and even in the trash bins of downtown Manhattan sandwich shops. The system was drowning in its own success. You see, in 1968, buying a stock wasn't just a digital click. It was a physical act. When you bought 100 shares of General Motors, someone had to physically find a piece of paper with a fancy border, type your name on it, stamp it, sign it, and send it to you via messenger who ran through the streets of New York with a leather bag. It was a 19th century bureaucracy trying to handle a 20th century boom. And it was failing. Here is the question you need to ask yourself. When the system breaks down because you own too much, does the system fix the machine, or does it decide that you are the problem? By mid-1968, the volume of trading had reached insanity levels. We are talking about 15 million shares changing hands every single day. Today, a computer handles that in a microsecond. But back then, it required an army of clerks working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, fueled by coffee and desperation. But even that wasn't enough. The backlog of unprocessed trades, the so-called fails to deliver, reached over $4 billion. That is $4 billion in 1968 money. The entire system was insolvent, and nobody knew who owned what anymore. The situation became so critical that the governors of the New York Stock Exchange made a decision that sounds unbelievable today. They surrendered. They admitted they couldn't keep up. To stop the bleeding, they ordered the stock market to close every Wednesday. Think about that for a second. The beating heart of global capitalism, the center of the financial universe, had to shut its doors 1 day a week just so the clerks could catch up on the paperwork. It was a national humiliation. The Soviets laughed. The Europeans panicked. Wall Street had to admit that physical property was a logistical nightmare. This period, known as the paperwork crisis, is usually taught in business schools as a boring anecdote about operational efficiency. They tell you it was a technical problem that needed a technical solution, but they are lying to you. It wasn't just a technical problem. It was the moment the financial elite realized that individual property rights were an obstacle to their profit margins. They realized that if millions of people insisted on holding their own property, the market would grind to a halt. If physical ownership slows down the casino, what does the casino do? Does it slow down the game? Or does it remove the physical ownership? Wall Street needed a solution, and they needed it fast. They couldn't keep hiring more clerks, and they certainly couldn't keep closing the market on Wednesdays. The solution they came up with was brilliant, elegant, and absolutely diabolical. They decided to eliminate the movement of the paper altogether. They created a new entity called the Central Certificate Service, or CCS. This was the grandfather of the DTCC and Cede Co that we discussed in the last dossier. The pitch to the public was simple: safety and efficiency. They told investors that holding physical certificates was dangerous. You could lose them. They could be stolen. Your house could burn down. Wouldn't it be better, they argued, if we kept all the certificates safe in one giant, impregnable vault? We will immobilize the paper. All the certificates will stay in our basement, and we will just update a ledger to show who owns them. No more messengers running through the streets. No more lost paper. Just pure, efficient bookkeeping. It sounded like a convenience, like valet parking for your stocks. You pull up to the restaurant, you toss the keys to the valet, and he parks the car for you. You still own the car, right? You just have a ticket in your pocket instead of the keys. It seems like a fair trade. You get convenience. They handle the logistics. The Central Certificate Service absorbed millions of certificates, stacking them floor to ceiling in their vaults. The paperwork crisis ended. The market reopened on Wednesdays. The volume could now go to infinity. But here is the trick that nobody noticed in 1968. When you use valet parking, the valet doesn't transfer the title of the car into his name. He just holds the keys. But the Central Certificate Service did something different. To make their ledger system work legally, they required the certificates to be re-registered. They couldn't have millions of certificates with millions of different names sitting in their vault. That would still require physical handling. So they canceled all the individual certificates and issued jumbo certificates, registered in one single name. Do you see the sleight of hand yet? They told you they were storing your property. In reality, they were transferring the title to themselves. This is where the crime was committed, not with a gun, but with a lawyer's pen. In the process of immobilizing the paper to save the market, Wall Street fundamentally changed the legal nature of stock ownership. Before 1968, if you bought a share of Ford, you were a shareholder. You had a direct legal relationship with the Ford Motor Company. You were an owner. After the creation of the CCS and later the DTCC, that direct line was severed. The new owner of record on Ford's books became the clearinghouse, later Cede Co. You, the investor, were demoted. You became what is legally known as a beneficial owner. Let me explain this with an analogy that fits our world. Imagine you walk into a high-stakes casino in Las Vegas. You put $1 million of cash on the table. The dealer takes your cash and gives you plastic chips. While you are in the casino, those chips are as good as money. You can bet them. You can win. You can lose. You feel rich. But do you own the cash anymore? No. The casino owns the cash. You own a claim on the cashier's cage. You have a security entitlement to be paid, provided the casino has the money when you decide to leave. The 1968 paperwork crisis turned the entire global stock market into that casino. By surrendering the physical certificates for the sake of efficiency, investors traded their property rights for contract rights. They traded the car for the valet ticket, and for 50 years nobody cared. Why? Because the valet always brought the car back. The casino always cashed out the chips. The system worked, so nobody read the fine print. But what happens when the valet garage burns down? What happens when the casino runs out of cash? Does your plastic chip still have value if the cage is closed? This brings us to the terrifying reality of today. The system built in 1968 to fix a backlog of paper has evolved into the ultimate trap. That beneficial owner status wasn't just a temporary fix. It became the foundation of modern financial law. In 1994, with the revision of Article 8 of the Uniform Commercial Code. This separation was cemented in stone. The law now explicitly states that you do not own the underlying asset. You own a security entitlement. Let's go back to the valet parking analogy. Imagine if, after 50 years of parking cars, the valet company changed its terms of service. Imagine the fine print now says, in the event that the valet company goes bankrupt, all cars in the garage become the property of the valet company to pay off its debts. You would call the police. You would say it's theft. But in the financial world, this is the law. It's called rehypothecation and primacy of the secured creditor. The great taking isn't some conspiracy theory about the future. It is the legal structure inherited from 1968. The monster created by Wall Street wasn't the paperwork crisis. The monster was the solution. The solution stripped you of your property rights and turned you into an unsecured creditor. They solved the logistics of trading by destroying the concept of ownership. They prioritized the velocity of money over the security of property. And the irony? They did it because paper was too heavy and too slow. They told you physical ownership was obsolete. They sold you convenience, and you paid with your sovereignty. They fixed the paperwork crisis by taking away the paper. What do you think they will take away when the next crisis hits? So, here we are. We are living in a digital version of 1968, but the stakes are infinitely higher. The system is once again drowning, not in paper, but in debt. The leverage in the system makes the 1960s look like a child's piggy bank. And just like back then, the system will protect itself first. When the next collapse comes, the valet is not going to return your car. The casino is going to close the cage. This is why we talk about Bitcoin. And I don't mean crypto. I mean Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the only asset class that solves the paperwork crisis without destroying ownership. It is the only digital asset that does not require a central certificate service. It does not need a seed and company. It does not need a valet. When you hold Bitcoin in self-custody, you are not a beneficial owner. You are the owner. Period. There is no counterparty. There is no security entitlement. The ledger is not hidden in a basement in New York. It is distributed across the entire planet. Wall Street fixed the 1968 crisis by centralizing control. Bitcoin fixes the money by decentralizing it. They want you to believe that you need them to hold your hand and your wealth. History proves that when you let them hold it, they eventually keep it. The paperwork crisis of 1968 was a warning. It was the moment the door to the trap was opened. Most people walked right in, blinded by the promise of easy trading and soaring profits. But now you know the history. You know that the efficiency of the modern market is built on the grave of your property rights. The valet has your keys. The question is, are you going to leave the car there, or are you going to drive it out before the garage locks its doors for good? This is beyond crypto. Stay awake.